At 19, Layla Collins was homeless, sleeping in an abandoned warehouse with $74 and nowhere left to go. Then, at 2:13 one morning, she watched a mansion burn on a distant hill. By sunrise, a hidden chamber had been discovered beneath the ashes, holding nearly $20 million. But the fortune wasn't what stopped Layla cold. Carved into the steel door was the same symbol she'd worn around her neck since she was a baby. For 19 years, Layla believed no one had ever wanted her. What happened next would make her question everything. Because the $20 million was only the beginning. The real secret was why Layla had been hidden at all. And once that truth came to light, there was no bearing it again. When Layla Collins walked out of foster care at 19, no one was waiting for her. There was no family car at the curb, no mother trying not to cry, no voice telling her to call when she got somewhere safe. Layla carried a faded backpack, $74, and a silver necklace she'd worn for as long as she could remember. 3 weeks later, she was homeless. She found an abandoned warehouse outside Ravenwood, Ohio, and slept on an old mattress beneath a broken window. At night, she kept her coat on and her shoes within reach. Layla had learned early that sometimes you had to leave before anyone explained why. One evening, she bought a can of soup from a gas station. She almost bought bread too, but after counting the bills in her pocket twice, she quietly put it back. Outside, a family sat in a minivan laughing over something Layla couldn't hear. She looked away. There were some things loneliness made harder if you stared at them too long. 19 years in foster care had taught Layla how to disappear. Don't ask too many questions. Don't expect anyone to stay. And if people don't notice you, maybe they can't hurt you. From the warehouse window, Layla could see an old mansion standing alone on a distant hill. Something about it bothered her. Sometimes, just before sleep, she saw a blue kitchen door in her mind, a woman's hand resting against it. 4 soft notes of a melody Layla somehow knew before she heard them. She never saw the woman's face, and by morning, the memory or dream was gone. Then, at 2:13 one cold morning, Layla opened her eyes. The sky above the hill was burning red. The mansion was on fire. Before the first fire engine arrived, a black SUV raced down the hill. Layla caught only the last 3 characters of its license plate. For reasons she couldn't explain, she wrote them on the back of an old receipt. Layla had spent her entire life learning how to remain invisible. She didn't know it yet, but somewhere beyond those flames, someone was about to discover that she existed. By sunrise, the mansion on the hill was little more than a blackened skeleton. Layla watched the smoke from the warehouse window before finally pulling on her backpack. She told herself she was only going because of the black SUV. The last 3 characters of its license plate were still written on the back of an old gas station receipt in her pocket. The walk took nearly 40 minutes. Fire engines crowded the narrow road. Yellow tape stretched between trees, and the air smelled of wet ash and burned wood. Layla stopped near the driveway, suddenly aware of her oversized coat and worn boots. A deputy noticed her. "Road's closed, miss." "I know. I saw a car leave last night." That was how Layla met Grace Holloway, a fire investigator in her early 50s with gray at her temples and tired, observant eyes. Grace asked where Layla had been when she saw the SUV. Layla pointed toward the abandoned warehouse. "You live there." Layla lowered her eyes. For now, Grace didn't ask her to explain. She simply nodded and said, "All right. Tell me what you saw." Layla remembered that kindness. She described the fire, the time on her phone, and the SUV racing down the hill before the first sirens arrived. Grace carefully placed the receipt inside an evidence sleeve. "You did the right thing coming here. Layla couldn't remember the last time anyone had told her that. She should have left then. But something about the burned mansion kept her there. As investigators moved through the ruins, Layla stared at the eastern side of the house. There should be a door there. The thought came without warning. A blue door beside the kitchen. For one brief second, Layla saw sunlight across a floor and a woman's hand resting against painted wood. Then the image disappeared. Layla stepped back, unsettled. She had never been inside this house. At least, she didn't think she had. A shout came from the ruins. Part of the foundation had collapsed inward, revealing an opening beneath the mansion. Nearly an hour later, Grace returned. "You said you've never been here before." "No. Do you know the Collins family?" Layla frowned. "My last name is Collins." Grace studied her. "We found a staircase beneath the foundation." Layla went still. "What kind?" "Stone." The dreams returned immediately. Steps descending into darkness. A woman's voice. 4 soft notes. "I've seen it," Layla whispered. Grace heard her. "Where?" "In dreams." Layla expected disbelief. Instead, Grace asked, "What else do you see?" "A door, but I never get that far." Engineers spent hours making the opening safe. Layla remained nearby, cold and hungry. Around noon, Grace brought her coffee and a turkey sandwich. Layla quietly put the sandwich in her backpack. "You don't like turkey?" Grace asked. "I do." "Then why aren't you eating?" Layla hesitated. For later, Grace walked away. 10 minutes later, she returned with another sandwich and placed it beside Layla. "One for now," she said, "one for later." Layla stared at the food. "Okay," she whispered. By late afternoon, investigators had reached the bottom of 14 stone steps. There stood a steel door. Grace showed Layla a photograph. "Does this mean anything to you?" At the center of the door was a bird with its wings spread inside a circle. Layla's hand moved to her throat. Slowly, she pulled the silver necklace from beneath her shirt. The same bird, the same circle. Grace looked from the pendant to the photograph. "Where did you get that?" "I don't know. They said I had it when I entered foster care." "How old were you?" "A few months." For the first time in Layla's life, a piece of her past existed outside a government file. Hours later, authorities opened the steel door. The chamber beyond it had survived the fire. Inside were safes, bonds, gold certificates, and financial records stretching back decades. Preliminary estimates would eventually place the assets at just under $20 million. But that wasn't what made Grace return with a pale expression. "We found a photograph." She handed Layla a clear evidence sleeve. The picture showed a young woman standing in front of the mansion, holding a baby. Layla stared at the woman's face. The eyes, the narrow chin, the slight curve of her mouth. For 19 years, Layla had looked into mirrors without knowing where those features came from. Now she was seeing them on someone else. Then she noticed the baby. Around the child's neck was a silver pendant, a bird with open wings inside a circle. Layla turned the photograph over. 6 words were written on the back. "For see when it is safe." "See," Layla whispered. Her hands began to shake. "My name is Layla Collins." "I know," Grace said softly. Layla looked back at the burned mansion. All her life, she had carried one question. Why didn't anyone want me? She had asked it at 7 when another child was adopted. At 12 when her belongings were returned in garbage bags. At 16 when she stopped caring about birthdays. But now the question was changing. Layla looked at Grace, tears filling her eyes. What if nobody abandoned me? Grace didn't answer. Neither of them knew yet. Layla wasn't thinking about the fortune beneath the house. She was staring at a woman who had her eyes. For 19 years, Layla believed her story began when someone left her behind. Now she wondered if someone had been trying desperately to hide her. And if that was true, what had they been hiding her from? By the next morning, Layla's life no longer felt entirely her own. Someone had leaked the discovery. A local television van waited below the burned mansion. Reporters stood behind yellow tape, talking about a hidden chamber, a mysterious young woman, and a fortune believed to be worth nearly $20 million. Layla watched from inside Grace Holloway's car. A week earlier, she'd been counting quarters at a gas station. Now, strangers were trying to photograph her through a windshield. "Don't read anything about yourself online," Grace said. "I don't have enough data on my phone." Grace almost smiled. Then a dark sedan pulled into the gravel lot. The man who stepped out was in his late 60s, tall and silver-haired, wearing a charcoal overcoat. He spoke to a deputy, looked toward Grace's car, and suddenly stopped. He was staring at Layla, not with pity, not with suspicion, with recognition. He approached slowly. "You're Layla Collins." Grace stepped forward. "And you are?" "Richard Hale, attorney, Hale and Mercer Legal Group." Richard looked at Layla again. "You have her eyes. Whose?" He hesitated. "Madeline's." The name meant nothing to Layla. "Who is Madeline?" "Madeline Collins owned this property." Richard's voice softened. "And if the records I've seen are accurate, she was your mother." The word mother struck Layla harder than she expected. "My mother," Richard nodded. "She trusted me once." 19 years of questions rushed through Layla's mind. Did she know where I was? Why didn't she come back? Did she ever think about me? Layla tried to speak, but nothing came out. "I know this is overwhelming," Richard said. "No," Layla whispered. "You don't." Richard lowered his eyes. "You're right." The answer surprised her. "I can help you," he continued. "The estate, the trusts, the assets beneath that house. What's inside the chamber is more complicated than anyone here realizes." Grace's expression changed. "You already know what's inside." "I know the Collins family." "That wasn't my question." Richard handed Layla his business card. "Call me when you're ready to know about Madeline." Then he left. Grace watched his sedan disappear. "You don't like him," Layla said. "I don't know him." "You looked like you didn't like him." Grace turned toward her. "I don't like people who arrive with answers before anyone knows which questions to ask." That evening, Grace arranged a temporary motel room for Layla. The heater rattled. The room smelled faintly of bleach. To Layla, it felt almost luxurious. There was a lock on the door, a shower, a bed she was allowed to sleep in. She placed her backpack beside the bed. For nearly an hour, Layla stared at Richard's business card. "Call me when you're ready to know about Madeline." She wanted to call. For 19 years, every answer about her life had been a blank space in a government file. Now someone knew her mother's name. Layla picked up her phone. Then she remembered Grace's warning. Instead, she reached into her backpack and pulled out the old gas station receipt. 3 characters were written on the back. 7KJ. Layla called Grace. "I want to know about the SUV." "Why?" Richard knew the family. He knew about the money. He's an estate attorney. He knew before the reporters did. Silence. Layla looked at the business card. "Hale and Mercer." Another silence. "I'll call you back," Grace said. 43 minutes later, someone knocked on Layla's motel door. Layla froze. "Who is it?" Grace. Layla checked the peephole before opening the door. Grace entered with a thin folder. The partial plate isn't enough to identify one vehicle with certainty, she said. But we checked companies connected to the Collins estate. She opened the folder. Inside was a photograph of a black SUV. The vehicle is registered to Mercer Investigative Services. A Mercer. Grace nodded. As in Hale and Mercer, Layla sat down. Richard's car. Not his personal vehicle. But his firm has used that company for years. The man who knew her mother's name was connected to the SUV Layla had seen leaving before the fire. Do you think he burned the house? We don't accuse anyone without evidence. That isn't what I asked. Grace sat across from her. No, she said quietly. It isn't. Then Layla's phone rang. Unknown number? She looked at Grace. Answer it, Grace said. Hello. Silence. Then a familiar voice. Layla. Richard Hale. How did you get my number? Your mother spent years making sure certain people couldn't find you. Layla gripped the phone. I think you deserve to know why. Richard continued. Then tell me. Not over the phone. Why? Richard's voice no longer sounded polished. It sounded tired. Almost afraid. Because Madeline wasn't hiding the money, Layla. Layla stopped breathing. She was hiding you. The call ended. Layla remained still. A week earlier, she'd been homeless, sleeping beneath a broken warehouse window. Now a burned mansion had given her a photograph of a mother she couldn't remember. A hidden chamber had revealed nearly $20 million. And the first man to offer answers was connected to a vehicle seen leaving the fire. For 19 years, Layla had asked why she'd been abandoned. Now, for the first time, she was afraid of the answer. Perhaps Madeline Collins had not disappeared from her daughter's life. Perhaps she had been running from something, and whatever she'd been running from, had just learned Layla was still alive. By morning, Layla had listened to Richard's final words so many times in her head that they no longer sounded real. She was hiding you. Layla sat on the edge of the motel bed with her coat wrapped around her shoulders. She hadn't slept. Every sound in the parking lot made her look toward the window. At 7, Grace knocked on the door carrying 2 coffees. Layla let her in. I want to know who Madeline Collins was, Layla said. Grace placed the coffees on the table. We're working on it. No. Layla shook her head. I've heard that my whole life. Grace looked at her. We're reviewing your foster records, sealed birth documents, and the records from the chamber. I don't want another file. Layla's voice cracked. I want to know why my mother knew my name. And I didn't even know hers. Grace said nothing. There are moments when comfort can sound almost cruel. Grace seemed to understand that. So she simply sat down. Over the next 2 weeks, pieces of Layla's life began returning to her from places she'd never known existed. A hospital admission under an incomplete name, a birth certificate sealed by court order, a foster intake record with a date that didn't match the medical records. Someone had changed the trail. Carefully, deliberately. Then the DNA results came back. Grace brought the report to Layla herself. She didn't hand it over immediately. Layla, just tell me. Grace took a breath. Madeline Collins was your biological mother. Layla stared at her. For 19 years, she'd imagined this moment. She had thought she might cry, maybe feel whole. Instead, anger rose so quickly that she stood. She knew. Grace remained quiet. She knew I existed. Yes, and she left me there. We don't know. 11 homes, Grace. Layla's voice grew louder. I lived in 11 foster homes. She began pacing. One family returned my clothes in garbage bags because they said I was difficult. I spent my 13th birthday waiting for a woman who promised she'd come back after work. Her eyes filled. She never came back. Grace looked down, and my mother knew my name. Layla laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Don't tell me she protected me. I wasn't going to. Good. Because at that moment, Layla didn't want a noble explanation. She wanted permission to be angry. 3 days later, Grace called. They had found a locked wooden box among the documents recovered from the chamber. Inside were 19 envelopes. Each one carried a date. Layla's birthdays. Her 5th, her 10th, her 16th, her 19th. None had been mailed. Layla sat alone at the motel table and opened the first letter with trembling hands. Madeline wrote about a little girl she could only imagine. She wondered whether Layla liked pancakes, whether she was afraid of thunderstorms, whether someone remembered to brush the tangles from her hair gently. Layla stopped reading. She pressed both hands against her mouth. No one had brushed her hair gently. Not until she was old enough to do it herself. She opened another letter. Madeline imagined Layla's first day of school. Another mentioned a school dance she hoped her daughter would attend. The details were sometimes wrong. Painfully wrong. Madeline had invented a childhood because she had not been there to witness the real one. Layla hated her for that, and loved her a little for trying. Both feelings lived inside her at once. The final envelope had been written shortly before Madeline died. Layla unfolded the paper. The handwriting was weaker. Every year I stay away. You may believe I love you less. The truth is, staying away is the only protection I have left to give you. Layla read the sentence again. Then a third time. She lowered the letter. For most of her life, Layla had believed abandonment meant absence. Someone leaves because they don't want you. It was simple. Painful, but simple. Madeline had ruined that simplicity. Because now, Layla was beginning to understand that a person could love you and still make a choice that wounded you. A mother could believe she was saving her child and still leave that child crying in bedrooms that never felt like home. Layla pressed the letter against her chest and finally cried, not the quiet tears she'd learned to hide as a child. She cried for the little girl who had waited, for the mother who had written 19 letters and mailed none of them. For every birthday, both of them had spent apart, each believing the distance was necessary for a different reason. Grace arrived near sunset. She found Layla sitting on the floor beside the bed, surrounded by open envelopes. Was she a good person, Layla asked. Grace leaned against the wall. I don't know. Layla looked up. It wasn't the answer she expected. Grace continued. But I think she was afraid. Of Richard. Maybe. Layla looked at the letters. No. Grace frowned. What? Layla picked up the final letter. My mother erased me from her life. She changed records. She stayed away for 19 years. Her voice became quiet. You don't do all that because you're afraid of one lawyer. Grace watched her carefully. Layla stood and walked toward the window. Outside, cars moved along the highway, ordinary people going home to ordinary lives. For 19 years, Layla had asked one question. Why didn't my mother want me? Now she finally had part of the answer. Madeline had wanted her, perhaps more than Layla had ever allowed herself to imagine. But that truth opened another door, a darker one. Layla touched the silver necklace at her throat. If she loved me enough to disappear, she whispered. Then what was she so afraid would happen if someone found me? Grace didn't answer. And this time, Layla understood why. Because somewhere between 19 unopened birthday letters and a hidden chamber worth nearly $20 million. The question had changed. Layla was no longer trying to discover why her mother had left. She was trying to discover who had made her believe leaving was the only way to keep her daughter alive. Richard Hale chose a small diner outside Ravenwood for their meeting. Layla thought that was strange. A man who wore $1,000 coats and represented families with hidden vaults probably had an office with polished floors and expensive coffee. But Richard chose a booth beside a fogged window. Maybe he wanted to seem ordinary. Or maybe, Layla thought, he knew ordinary people were easier to trust. Grace waited in a car across the street. Richard noticed. "You brought the fire, investigator," she brought herself. A faint smile crossed his face. "You're more careful than Madeline was at your age." Layla sat down. "You said my mother was hiding me." Richard's smile disappeared. "I did. Then tell me why." The waitress poured coffee. Neither of them touched it. Richard folded his hands. "The money beneath that house didn't begin with your mother. It belonged to the Collins family long before Madeline inherited it." He explained that Layla's grandfather had been part of a private investment group decades earlier. The group bought struggling businesses, moved capital between companies, and withdrew from several ventures shortly before a devastating financial collapse. The Collins family survived. Others didn't. Factories closed. Retirement accounts disappeared. Families lost homes. "Was it illegal?" Layla asked. Richard looked toward the window. "Not everything that ruins a life is illegal." Layla remembered that sentence. Richard told her the family fortune had grown quietly through trusts, bonds, and private investments. Just under $20 million. Enough money to change a life. Enough money, Richard said, to destroy one too. Madeline inherited the assets and the claims attached to them. He continued. Old partners. Families who believed the Collinses knew more than they admitted. People who spent years convincing themselves your family owed them something. My family. Richard looked at her. Yes, Layla, your family. She hated how unfamiliar the words felt. Why hide me? Because when Madeline became pregnant, she received threats. Layla's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. What kind of threats? Photographs, notes, details about her appointments, places she'd been. Richard paused. Then, someone sent her a photograph taken outside the hospital after you were born. Layla stopped moving. What was in the picture? You? The diner seemed quieter. Richard lowered his voice. Madeline believed that as long as you were publicly connected to her, you could be used against her. So she put me in foster care. She removed your name from every trail she could reach, and then left me there for 19 years. Richard looked down. Yes, Layla wanted him to defend Madeline. Part of her wanted someone to say her mother had made the only possible choice. Richard didn't. I told her not to do it, he said. Layla looked up. You did. I told her there were other ways, security, private schools, new identities. Then why did she? Because fear had already made the decision for her. The words stayed between them. Layla thought of 19 letters, 19 birthdays, a mother imagining pancakes and school dances. A loving choice can still leave a wound. She understood that now. But Richard hadn't asked her there only to discuss Madeline. He opened a leather folder and placed several documents on the table. The preliminary records indicate you are the intended beneficiary of the Collins Trust. Layla stared at the papers. What does that mean? It means, if the documents are authenticated and no competing claim succeeds, the assets may legally pass to you. $20 million. Just under. Layla looked out the window. Across the street, Grace sat in her car. 3 weeks earlier, Layla had put bread back on a gas station shelf because she couldn't afford to spend another few dollars. Now a man was telling her she might own nearly 20 million. She expected to feel something. Joy, relief, maybe disbelief. Instead, she thought about the families Richard said had lost their homes. Is the money clean? Richard leaned back. Legally? I didn't ask legally. For the first time, Richard seemed genuinely surprised. No, he said slowly, you didn't. He studied her. The assets are lawful, but history is rarely as clean as paperwork makes it look. Layla nodded. That answer frightened her more than a lie would have. Richard pushed another document toward her. I can protect you from this. Layla looked at him. How? A managed trust. My firm retains control of the assets. You receive housing, an annual allowance, medical coverage, education if you want it. Layla almost laughed. An allowance. A substantial one. So you control the money. We protect it. From who? Richard held her gaze. From everyone, including me. Silence. There it was. Layla looked at the document again. Richard spoke carefully. You grew up with nothing. Layla's jaw tightened. I'm aware. Then listen to me before you become angry. Too late. $20 million doesn't heal 19 years of having nothing. Layla. His voice softened. It gives every wound a bigger room to live in. Layla said nothing, because the cruelest part was that she understood what he meant. She knew what hunger had done to her, what abandonment had done. She knew how quickly she hid sandwiches in backpacks. What would $20 million do to someone who still counted every dollar before buying bread? Richard placed a pen beside the documents. You don't have to carry this. Layla stared at the pen. For one dangerous moment, the offer felt like kindness. A home. Medical care. Enough money to never sleep in a warehouse again. And someone else would make the difficult decisions. Someone older. Someone educated. Someone who knew her family. Layla reached toward the pen, then stopped. She remembered being 7 years old while adults decided which home she'd sleep in. 12, when someone packed her clothes into garbage bags. 19, standing outside foster care with $74 because a date on a government form said she was ready to manage alone. Her entire life had been shaped by people deciding what Layla Collins was ready for. She pulled her hand away. No. Richard's expression changed. Think carefully. I have. You've had 2 weeks. I've had 19 years. Richard looked at her for a long time. Then he closed the folder. You sound like your mother. Layla stood. I wouldn't know. She walked out of the diner. Grace unlocked the car door. Neither woman spoke until they were several miles away. Then Grace asked, How did it go? He offered to protect me. Grace glanced at her. And Layla looked through the window. I think I'm starting to hate that word. The next morning, an envelope lay outside Layla's motel room. No stamp. No name. Inside was a photograph. Layla, sleeping on the old mattress in the abandoned warehouse. The picture had been taken through the broken window. Her stomach turned. She flipped it over. 6 words were written across the back. You were safer when you were invisible. Layla sat on the motel floor. For the first time since leaving foster care, she seriously considered running. Then she looked at the silver necklace around her neck. Her mother had spent 19 years disappearing. Perhaps Madeline believed she had no other choice. But Layla did. And for the first time in her life, the opportunity in front of her wasn't $20 million. It was the opportunity to decide whether fear would make her disappear too. The photograph stayed on the motel floor until morning. Layla hadn't touched it again. She sat against the bed with her backpack open beside her, folding the few clothes she owned. One shirt, 2 pairs of socks, the old gas station receipt, 19 letters from a mother she had never known. Everything important in Layla's life still fit inside one backpack. By sunrise, she was ready to leave Ravenwood. She didn't know where she would go. That had never stopped her before. Layla reached for the zipper. Her fingers brushed the silver necklace at her throat, and she stopped. For 19 years, Madeline had lived by disappearing. She had erased names, changed records, and stayed away from the daughter she loved because fear had convinced her there was no safer choice. Richard had chosen something different. Control. He decided what truths should remain buried, what Layla was ready to know, what future she could be trusted to handle. And now someone was telling Layla to become invisible again. She looked at the packed backpack. For the first time, running didn't feel like survival. It felt like inheritance. Layla slowly unpacked her clothes. Then she called Grace. "I have something to show you." The photograph became evidence. By noon, Grace had arranged for Layla to meet an independent attorney named Hannah Brooks, a woman with no connection to the Collins estate or Richard's firm. Layla gave her copies of every document she legally possessed. She signed releases. She answered questions, and when investigators asked whether she was willing to give a formal statement about the SUV, Richard, and the photograph taken inside the warehouse, Layla said yes. Her voice shook. She said yes anyway. That was the first thing Layla learned about courage. Sometimes it doesn't sound brave. Sometimes courage is a frightened 19-year-old saying one word without taking it back. The fire investigation widened. Records from Mercer Investigative Services showed that Richard's firm had hired a private investigator named Owen Mercer days before the mansion burned. His instructions were brief. Retrieve the Collins documents. Quietly, Owen initially denied entering the property. Then investigators recovered location data placing his phone near the mansion shortly before 2 a.m. The black SUV had been his. Under questioning, the rest of the story began to break apart. Owen had entered through an old service door. He knew there were records hidden somewhere beneath the house, but not exactly where. While breaking through a wall near the eastern foundation, he damaged aging electrical lines. Sparks caught dry timber inside the wall. By the time Owen smelled smoke, the fire had already spread. He ran. Richard had never ordered him to burn the mansion. He had never ordered anyone to hurt Layla. But when Owen called him that night, Richard learned what had happened, and Richard said nothing. He allowed investigators to believe the fire might have been an accident. He watched Layla stand beside the ruins. Then he offered to protect her. When Grace explained it, Layla sat silently for a long time. So Richard didn't start the fire? No. But he knew. Yes. And he still looked me in the face. Grace nodded. Layla thought of Madeline. Her mother had hidden the truth because she believed silence would keep her daughter alive. Richard had hidden the truth because he believed silence would preserve control. For years, both of them had called it protection. But now Layla finally understood the difference. Madeline had sacrificed her own place in Layla's life. Richard had been willing to sacrifice Layla's right to choose her own. Love could make terrible mistakes. Fear could sound almost reasonable. But fear always wanted one more locked door. One more hidden file. One more person told they weren't ready for the truth. Layla was done with locked doors. 2 days later, she agreed to speak publicly. Hannah warned her that reporters would ask cruel questions. They did. One reporter asked whether a homeless 19-year-old was emotionally capable of controlling $20 million. Layla looked at him. For a second, she was 7 again. 12. 19. Standing outside foster care with $74. The old Layla would have lowered her eyes. Instead, she leaned toward the microphone. I don't know yet what kind of person $20 million could turn me into. The room became quiet. But I know exactly what having nothing taught me. She paused. It taught me what it feels like when every important decision about your life belongs to someone else. No one interrupted her. So whatever happens to that money, I won't make decisions about people without allowing them a voice in their own lives. Grace stood at the back of the room. Layla saw her smile. Only slightly, almost. That evening, Layla returned to the motel. The backpack still sat beside the bed. For years, she'd kept it close because she believed every place was temporary. Every home, every person, every promise. Layla picked it up. Then, slowly, she placed it inside the closet. She closed the door. It was a small thing. No one saw her do it. There were no reporters, no cameras. But years later, Layla would remember that moment as the night something inside her finally changed. She wasn't fearless. She still checked the motel lock twice. She still saved half a sandwich when she wasn't hungry. She still woke some mornings expecting to be told she had to leave. Healing. Layla was beginning to understand, did not erase the person you had been. It simply stopped fear from making every decision for her. Madeline had disappeared to protect her. Richard had controlled the truth to preserve a legacy. Layla would choose something neither of them had been able to choose. She would stay. She would be seen. And whatever came next, she would decide for herself. For the first time in 19 years, Layla Collins was no longer learning how to disappear. She was learning how to remain. The legal battle lasted 9 months. By the time it ended, winter had returned to Ravenwood. Layla Collins was 20 years old. The Collins Trust was legally hers. After taxes, claims, and the final accounting of assets recovered from the chamber, the estate was still valued at just under $20 million. People expected Layla to leave Ohio. Reporters wrote stories about the houses she could buy. Financial advisors sent brochures. Car dealerships somehow found her mailing address. One envelope contained a photograph of a white mansion in Florida. Layla laughed when she saw it. She had already learned what large houses were capable of hiding. She never rebuilt the mansion on the hill. The steel door beneath the foundation was removed. The financial records were preserved for investigators and historians. What remained of the chamber was eventually filled and sealed. Some people thought Layla should have kept it. A piece of family history, they said. But Layla had spent enough of her life around locked doors. She didn't need another one. The question of what to do with the money took longer. Layla didn't trust sudden answers anymore. So she listened. She met former foster youth in Cleveland, Columbus, and small towns where young people aged out of care with nowhere stable to sleep. Their stories sounded different, and exactly the same. One young man had lived in his car while working night shifts. A girl had spent 6 months moving between friends' couches because every apartment required a deposit she didn't have. Another young woman told Layla she'd slept behind the restaurant where she worked. "I had a job," she said. "People think if you have a job, you're okay." Layla understood. People had seen her walking through Ravenwood every morning. No one knew where she returned at night. One evening, Layla asked Hannah Brooks a question. "What happens the day they age out?" Hannah looked at her. "You already know." Layla did. A door opens. Someone hands you your belongings, and the world expects you to understand where to go. That night, Layla took the old backpack from her closet. She hadn't used it in months. The fabric was worn near the zipper. One strap had been repaired with black thread. Layla placed it on the table. Then she called Hannah. "I know what I want to do." The Madeline house opened 11 months later. It wasn't a mansion. Layla insisted on that. It was a renovated brick building near downtown Ravenwood with 12 small apartments, a shared kitchen, classrooms, and an office where residents could receive help finding work, opening bank accounts, and applying to college. There were rules. But no one was removed because they turned 19. No one's belongings were packed into garbage bags, and no one was told they should already know how to survive. Layla named the building after her mother. That decision took time. Madeline had loved her. Layla believed that now. But love had not erased the pain of 19 lost years. Naming the building after her was not forgiveness in the simple way people like to talk about forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. Madeline had made a choice from fear. Layla would build something from what that choice had taught her. On opening day, reporters gathered outside. Layla gave a short speech. She thanked Grace. She thanked Hannah. She spoke about young adults leaving foster care. She did not mention $20 million. When the cameras left, Layla finally breathed. Then she noticed a girl standing near the entrance. She was 18. Her name was Zoe. A caseworker stood beside her holding paperwork. Zoe carried one backpack. Nothing else. Layla looked at it. For a moment, the room disappeared. She saw the gates of foster care. $74. A gas station shelf. A loaf of bread she'd put back. An old mattress beneath a broken window. Layla walked toward her. "Hi, I'm Layla." "I know." Zoe looked embarrassed. "I saw you online." Layla smiled. "I'm sorry." Zoe almost laughed. Almost. The caseworker handed Layla the paperwork and began explaining Zoe's situation. Layla listened, but she kept noticing the way Zoe held the backpack strap. Tightly, as if someone might take it. Layla knew that grip. After the caseworker left, Zoe remained near the door. "You want to see your room?" Layla asked. Zoe shrugged. "Okay." The room was small. A bed, a desk, a dresser, a window overlooking a maple tree. Zoe placed her backpack on the bed. She didn't open it. "How long can I stay?" she asked. Layla leaned against the doorway. "We'll work on a plan together." Zoe looked down. "No, how long before I have to leave?" The question was quiet. Layla felt something inside her break open. Not painfully. Not this time. She thought of every home where she'd counted the days. Every adult whose kindness she'd been afraid to trust. Every night she'd slept with her shoes close enough to reach. Layla walked into the room and sat on the desk chair. "Until you have somewhere you actually want to go." Zoe stared at her. "What?" "You heard me." The girl's face changed. She turned toward the window quickly, but Layla saw the tears. For a moment, she wanted to say, "I know how you feel." She didn't. Pain was personal, even when two people carried similar scars. So Layla simply stayed in the chair. After a while, Zoe sat on the bed. Neither of them spoke. Outside, evening settled over Ravenwood. Years earlier, Madeline Collins had believed the only way to protect her daughter was to disappear. Richard Hale had believed protection meant controlling what Layla could know and choose. Layla had spent most of her life believing survival meant never needing anyone long enough to miss them. All three had been wrong in different ways. Sometimes protection wasn't leaving. Sometimes it wasn't controlling. Sometimes the most powerful thing one person could offer another was simply the promise that they would still be there tomorrow. Before Layla left Zoe's room, she noticed the backpack was still on the bed. "There's a closet," Layla said gently. Zoe looked at it. Well, maybe later. Layla nodded. Whenever you're ready. She understood. That night, Layla stood outside the Madeline house and looked up at the 12 illuminated windows. Behind each one was a young person whose entire life might still fit inside a backpack. The money beneath the mansion had changed what Layla could do, but the warehouse had changed what she noticed. She noticed the person saving food for later, the girl holding a backpack too tightly, the young man who had a job but nowhere to sleep, the people the world mistook for independent simply because no one had stayed long enough to see they were afraid. Layla touched the silver necklace at her throat. For 19 years, she had wanted someone to come back for her. In the end, no one could return those years. Not Madeline. Not $20 million. Not even Layla herself. But standing beneath the lights of the Madeline house, she finally understood something. Maybe healing wasn't about going back for the person you used to be. Maybe it was about recognizing that person in someone else's eyes and choosing not to walk away. Layla Collins had spent 19 years learning how to disappear. It took one fire, a hidden chamber, and a truth buried beneath an old mansion to teach her something far more difficult. How to stay. A few months after the Madeline house opened, Layla placed her silver necklace inside a small glass frame near the entrance. Beneath it were 9 words. The only thing I owned when I had nowhere to go. For several days, she walked past it without stopping. Then, one evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Layla stood in front of the glass. The building was quiet. A lamp glowed in the common room. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of people who expected to wake up in the same place tomorrow. Layla looked at the necklace. For 19 years, she had believed it was the only thing someone had left her. She carried that belief through 11 foster homes, through birthdays no one remembered, through the warehouse, through nights when she slept with her shoes close enough to reach. But now she knew the truth. Layla opened the frame. She lifted the necklace into her palm and ran her thumb across the worn silver bird. Then she placed it around her neck. It hadn't changed, but she had. For 19 years, Layla believed the necklace was proof that someone had left her behind. Now she understood it differently. It was proof that somewhere, a frightened mother had spent years hoping her daughter would survive long enough to find her way home. That truth did not give Layla back her childhood. It did not make Madeline's choice painless. Some wounds don't disappear when we finally understand them. Sometimes we simply learn to carry them differently. A few nights later, Layla passed Zoe's room. The door was open. Layla stopped. For months, Zoe had kept her backpack packed beside the bed. That night, the backpack was inside the closet, empty. Layla smiled. She didn't mention it the next morning. Some victories are too quiet to survive applause. The fire had revealed a hidden chamber. The chamber had revealed nearly $20 million. The money had revealed a family secret. But none of those things were the most valuable thing Layla found. All her life, she had searched for proof that someone had once wanted her. She had been wearing it around her neck all along. And maybe that's why Layla's story matters. Most of us carry something from the past, a question that was never answered, a goodbye that came too soon, a parent we understood only after we became older ourselves. We may never get every answer, but we still get to decide what happens to the pain we inherit. Layla could not change the beginning of her story, but she learned that a beginning does not own the ending. Being left behind does not mean you have to leave someone else behind. And sometimes, the greatest inheritance we can leave behind is the pain we finally decide not to pass on. If Layla's story stayed with you, subscribe for more stories about family secrets, second chances, and the truths we sometimes understand too late. And I'd like to ask you one question. Do you believe Madeline was right to disappear from her daughter's life if she truly believed it was the only way to keep Layla safe? Tell me what you think in the comments. There may be no easy answer, and perhaps that's why some stories stay with us long after they're over.